This is The Naked Life with Roxanne Noor.
Don't edit this out. Just leave all of this in, and they'll think, who the fuck is this girl? Like, she needs no introduction. This is Jade. Most of you know that she needs no introduction, and if you don't know that, educate yourself. You're missing out.
Okay, for the people that don't know who this is Jade Cali. Jade has studied practical philosophy, and that is what we want to explore today. In the most practical way to think about life is what makes up the fabric of our daily existence, which is decisions. What we choose, what we don't choose, how the decisions form habits. And so today we're going to be talking about the art of making decisions. And yeah, I think you're the perfect person to talk about this because you've said you've made such horrible decisions in life that we can learn from.
Yep. That's what qualifies me as my terrible decision-making skills. So without further ado, here's the art of making decisions. Thanks for the introduction. Hi. So it's like Oprah. I just think it's not YouTube where I'm like, hey guys, what's up? It's Oprah, right?
Yes.
Is this Oprah or YouTube?
It's Oprah.
It's Oprah. Okay.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
So actually, I was thinking about in life how when we don't make decisions, it feels like the world decides for us.
Mm-hmm.
And it also feels like, we talked about this the other day at your workshop about decision making, but on a grander level, when you're in flow with life, there's no decisions being made because everything is just kind of happening in divine timing, accord, and there's this feeling of sensing where there's no, yes, I need to do this, or no, I need to do this. And the fabric of our daily lives is kind of built upon the decisions we make, which then form our habits.
Right.
And so the question is, how do you know how to make informed decisions? And how do you get to the place where your habits don't feel like you're trying? It doesn't feel like coercion or force.
Right. I'm going to split that into two parts because that's two very good and separate questions. But I think with the decisions themselves, I know we spoke the other day about making decisions that are fully aligned with your values and your goals and where you're going. And the way to be in flow with those kind of decisions is to be independent of the outcome. It's almost like you're not doing things to control the outcome, to make something happen. It's just that you are making that decision because you are that kind of person that chooses from those values. So I'm choosing now to make a decision based out of kindness. It may not be received how I'm intending it to be, but I'm completely not in control of that and not trying to be in control of that. I think that's how you get in the flow state of making any kind of decision. Is sometimes we think we're making decisions, but what we're making is strategies. We are really tactically trying to take a hold of the future and arrange it in a way that we want it to be. It's not possible, as you know if you've ever tried to do it, right? It's stressful, it's not possible, life has other plans for you. So we're not trying to make a strategy to get what we want. We are just moving in alignment with the kind of person we want to be. That's the way to effortlessly end up where you want to and need to go. Now to come to the second part about habits. Habits is something I struggle with, even though I've done a lot of research, a lot of testing, a lot of, like trial and error experiments on myself with habits. You have to develop a value of consistency. You have to value consistency and tell yourself you're a consistent person until you become a consistent person. Habits are not effortless until you become the person who would have that habit. So in Atomic Habits, which I think is the most comprehensive book on habits at the moment, that I think it's by a guy called James Clear, he says that the way to really develop a habit is you're actually developing a self-identity. So the self-identity is, I am a person who goes to the gym every day. If you truly believe you're a person that goes to the gym every day, you just go to the gym every day. It's not even a question, because that is your part of your identity. Otherwise, if you have this kind of like, I'm a lazy person, I don't really like going to the gym, it's an effort to go to the gym, I go to the gym for 2 weeks but I always stop, that's what you're going to see, right? Because you are that kind of person, and then you're not going to be able to develop that habit effortlessly. You kind of have to, it's this kind of, I don't know if I'd call it a vicious cycle or positive reinforcement. It can be either one, but you have to do it until you reach the tipping point of believing you are it. Then it will happen by itself. And you'll see these things online. It's like, it takes 28 days to form a habit. But it doesn't take 28 days. It takes as long as you believe it, and then you keep doing it, right? Like if you stop doing it, then it's not a habit anymore. So it takes almost a lifetime to do it. Yeah.
And it also seems like the body has mechanics of picking up habits quite easily. For example, with waking up in the morning, for me to start waking up again at 7 a.m., it only takes 5 days. And I'll start waking up 15 minutes before the alarm clock even basically rings. So the body gets used to certain functionings. And it's almost like for me at least, in order to keep a habit, I have to have some positive reinforcement back. And so there's some sort of pleasure I'm gaining from it. And I think a lot of it is what you said with identity, or becoming the person that you know is possible, basically.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering also what the difference is between habits and rituals. Because for me, I really feel that when I wake up, the mornings are very much centered around me time and isolating, being alone. I'm a writer, so carving out the time to write, to be in nature, to also have movement, so I swim in the morning. And then the end of the day, because we live on an island, is always like sunset ritual, being around people playing music, watching like the body receiving that the day is closing. And so what would you say is the difference that you felt in your life between forming habits and just a ritual?
Wow, that's such a good question. A few things that came up while you were speaking as well, about getting that instant reward from a habit. You won't do something over and over again that's not fully pleasant, that you're not getting some sort of benefit from. Even if it's a negative habit, you're getting a benefit. And they do say in habit formation, like you have to have a cue to do it, but then it has to be easy and pleasant. If it's easy and pleasant, you're very highly likely to do it. And if it's either difficult or unpleasant, it's very difficult to do it. So when you're choosing a habit, it has to be something you like doing. Like if you don't like swimming, then you're not going to be able to develop a habit doing it, right? The difference between a habit and a ritual, is it a semantic difference? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's like we think of habits as something that is just like an automatic process, whereas we think of ritual as something that we choose that has a deeper meaning. Like a sunset ritual is telling your body the day is over. A full moon ritual is something you do every full moon to like clear your energy. It's really nothing more than a habit that we are giving a deeper meaning to. But you could make all your habits rituals. And maybe if you start to frame your habits as rituals that you're doing for yourself, you have a higher chance of doing them, maybe. What do you think?
That's a beautiful way to frame it. There's something with feeling that ritual is in a way related to something more sacred or something that's like a more special, and habits are kind of what you said. And the beauty of habits is actually when it becomes automatic, because there's less friction, there's not a need to think about it or make the decision like, oh, I don't really want to. It's kind of like there's like a automation, which is beautiful in a way. It's not an ugly thing. It's like it takes less force and coercion when it's just like, it's just something you do actually because it's a part of who you are. And I think part of the strategy in making certain decisions become habits is the fact that at a certain point you're not deciding anymore.
That's exactly what it is. Like 100%. It costs energy to make a decision. Mental and emotional energy. You're weighing up two options and then like almost deciding between them costs you something to weigh them. Once you automate that process, you're saving energy. The brain is very efficient. It's why habits develop in the first place. But if you're not careful, you can develop negative habits through the same process. I think the best example of a habit is brushing teeth. Because almost everybody, brushes their teeth twice a day. Usually you do it at the same time. Usually you don't decide. You don't think, should I brush my teeth today? I don't really want to. Or maybe I could do it later. Or you don't do that. You just brush your teeth. And what's super interesting is before there was a huge advertisement campaign for toothpaste brands, in the United States, only 11% of people brush their teeth every day. 11%. And now it's like, it's a cultural habit. If you don't brush your teeth, it's disgusting.
People think you're gross. Yeah. And it was actually the same thing with, a lot of marketing strategies will use this because then the people are doing it every day, which makes money. Cereal was the same thing. Pretending that breakfast is super good for you and it's good to eat sugary cereal as soon as you wake up. Of when there's not a decision factor and it's every single day, how it just becomes us in a way.
You wouldn't dream of not brushing your teeth because you're not even making a choice when you choose to do it. So how can you make other positive things in your life become like that? That's essentially the study of habits, is how do we get people to do things like they brush their teeth every day?
Yeah, and I think another part of it, now we can get into maybe like habits we want to let go of, bad habits. For me, it's creating like a sufficient amount of friction in that it's difficult for me to obtain the thing that's bad, the thing that is actually harming me. So for example, my phone, I don't keep it near my bed anymore. Yeah, like I actually keep it completely out of my visibility. So I think that's another thing with bad habits, is trying to make it almost invisible to yourself, trying to completely take it out of the space. Like I have rules for my refrigerator. It's only fruit. There's nothing else allowed in my house besides fruit and tea.
Environment management. It's like 90% of habit building, right? Because if it's super difficult to do, you have to make a decision to do it, right? If the phone's not next to the bed, you can't compulsively check it before you've thought. So putting it far away forces you to choose. And when you choose, you're using your conscious decision-making abilities and not your just mindless unconscious, like, before I've even thought about it, I'm scrolling. So making things more difficult to do forces you to choose, and it gives you the power to make a decision. The same with the fridge, like, you check the fridge, if there's snack, like junk food,
if there's one chocolate, I'm
going
for
it. Like, it's in your mouth before you even thought, is this nutritious right now? Is this what I really want? Or is this what I've decided is good for me? It's already in your mouth. Yeah.
To me, there's so many aspects of self, and this question of making decisions in life, and it actually goes into what you were saying about values. So what person do I want to be? But to me, just fundamentally, there's so many aspects of self that I want to be able to feed. And it feels like a huge part of my lack of consistency in life is that I feel like certain time periods really demand different things. And there's different parts of my development as a human being. And so there's few fundamentals to my living that have always been the same, because I feel like my life will be complete shit without them.
Like what?
Like writing. I feel like every day I need to write no matter what. It's just a way to process things. It's part of my job, and it's just what I feel like I need to do to keep sane. There's like an actual need, but it feels like almost everything else, there's a lot of chaos in my life and a lot of spontaneity. And that was another question I had for you, is how do you keep being open to spontaneity in life, but then also feeling like there's a sufficient amount of discipline to get what you feel you want from life, like the grander vision, and also this ability. Because my ability to delay gratification is like a child's.
Finally, someone that's honest about it. Genuinely, we're like sophisticated children.
And the beauty to it is that I feel like I really carved my life in a way of bringing dedication to the present moment. But then if it's only the present moment, like concept of future is almost at like a very low point. And so when we think about like modern day success stories, it's not really like, I was just doing whatever the fuck I wanted and then I got what I wanted. It was like, no, there was work involved. There was me showing up every day. There was planning.
I compound interested over 10 years to become a millionaire. But you have to put money aside every month for that. That was really quite a rigid thing. And in every culture, there is this conflict between opposites, and then this like razor thin edge in the middle. So like the ancient Greeks had this like human nature is half Apollo and half Dionysus, so it's like the kind of rigid planning like parent figure, and then the spontaneous creative artist. And if you have too much rigidity and planning, you crush your creative, spontaneous, almost joyful nature. But if you have too much of this joyful nature, you never get anything done, you have nothing to show for it, you might go off the rails partying, like it's almost too much excess on each side. And how do we bring the two parts of ourselves together in a way that's balanced? One thing that I've discovered about myself in the last few years is the more I impose structure and rules on myself, from above almost, the more my inner child is like, I don't want to do that. Like if I say, okay, I'm not gonna eat sugar for a week, like I say, I'm not gonna eat sugar this week, I want to eat sugar more that week than I ever would if I didn't say it. I'm almost rebelling against my own tyrant parent nature. So how do we feed that inner child and allow that expression of joy and spontaneity, whilst also balancing it with, okay, this is the container. But this is essentially Shiva and Shakti, yin and yang, like all these polar opposite forces in different cultures are this idea of like, we have these polar opposites that can conflict, and how do we bring them together in balance? And if I had the answer to that, I would be a guru and a millionaire. And I'm not. So yeah, I have no fucking idea.
And then from your studies in philosophy, what have you learned about desire being a governing force of making decisions versus fear? And how would you say that they're actually two sides of the same coin? They both really reflect one another, actually. They're both, all in their nature, they're both almost the same to me.
Desire and fear?
Yeah.
Why so?
So when I think about my own desires, or like, for example, in relationship, this huge desire to be like fully chosen is actually just the fear of not being good enough. Like they're all so there's like a feedback loop. They interplay into each other. And during your workshop, when you were talking about the art of making decisions, you were speaking a lot about the fear, and that's when I interjected, and I was like, no, but the times that I have fucked up the most has been from really heady desires, more than just the fears. It's been this primal, like, I want. And the way that I want is sometimes really muddied by the culture. A lot of the time it's conditioned. A lot of the time it's from an egoic place. And when you're making decisions, how do you find, you talked about not being attached to the outcome, which is beautiful.
Right.
But how do you find also this place of neutrality, or even just knowing what to go after? And maybe that plays into what you were saying about values too.
It's a difficult one. And I know that in some schools of philosophy, they make distinctions between desire, a desire from lack and a desire from fullness. So desire from lack is almost the egoic, I want because I'm afraid of not having. So if you already feel that you don't have enough or you're not enough, then the want is to fill that. And so it's always dependent on the outcome. You always have to make an outcome happen. The right thing has to happen for you to feel better, for you to feel fuller, for you to feel wholer. Whereas in contrast with that, a desire from fullness is the moment is already perfect for you, or it's already full for you. You're already there, and spontaneously in that moment, you feel the desire to express something that you are in that. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a positive thing. It could be something like anger or tears, right? You're fully connecting with the moment is fine, but you feel such a grief that you spontaneously begin to cry through your desire to grieve. So even desire from fullness doesn't have to be always like these positive, joyful, like open-hearted things. But the difference is you are not trying to fill a hole with something. It's like you're already expressing the fullness inside of you in a way that aligns with you. No. That's how many of us always can live in this like non-egoic fullness of spontaneous expression. It's not realistic. So I think to bring more of a logical spin into it, like a mind, we talk often about ego and mind, and a lot of the time in spiritual communities, it's almost seen as a negative thing that we should be moving away from. But we can use the mind as a tool to back us up on the days where we are not feeling connected to our body. Like it's really always there, the mind. It's always talking. So you can always take a logical step back and ask yourself, this decision that I'm about to make, and I feel like I want. Let's just analyze it just for a second. Like let's use the mind to like go through it. So I want, but why? What am I hoping to get? And why am I hoping to get it? Like, is that to fill a need, to fill a lack? Am I trying to control my reality because I'm not feeling good enough about it? These are the kind of questions we can hopefully take a step back and ask ourselves to kind of see where we're at when we're about to make a decision. It doesn't always have to be that I'm so in my body, I'm in flow. It's just the decision arises. It's not always like that. Yeah. Does that answer your question, or was that just like
No,
everywhere?
It definitely answers it. And then something that came up for me while you were speaking is, the beautiful part of the mind, which is the ability to question. And I would say what you're talking about is almost a form of like self-inquiry. And actually, to me, it's a huge part of what philosophy is asking the essential whys of human nature. And it just feels like when I make a decision, if I have to use these questions, I probably shouldn't make a decision. And that's another part that I wanted to allude to is one of the worst feelings in life, and I've experienced it obviously quite a few times, is especially when I was younger, is this feeling of indecisiveness.
God.
Like when you're in the middle, you're like, and it also goes into the paradox of choice, which is a beautiful thing. Like, oh, world is so open, world is my oyster, what to do. Yeah. And this being halfway in, halfway out, and a lot of the time then being coerced by the external environment, like friends being like, oh, just come to Spain for this music festival because it will be so much fun, or someone else saying, oh, just do this because, and then you're just following the becauses of other people. Indecisiveness and doubt is like the prolonging of clarity. And when I'm in this place of not being able to make a decision, the most intelligent way for me to go about it is to actually not make a decision. The more I seem to get into the self-inquiry, and this is the thing with the mind, the mind can rationalize absolutely anything.
Mhm.
So any decision is like, oh, it's good because of that, or it's good because there's always a because that will be able to explain why I should or why I shouldn't do anything.
There's a definite value in waiting, like to be patient so that everything becomes clear. We don't need to rush into decisions. But sometimes if you don't make a decision, you are still making a decision if you choose not to do something, especially if it's a binary choice. And the thing about indecision, it is one of the most exhausting feelings in the world. You're just using your mental energy to just go backward and forward, like you're running backward and forward in your mind. It's awful. And sometimes you do need to wait it out. But often I find that indecision specifically is caused by a need to control your reality. That is why it happens. If you really check in with yourself, the reason you're going backward and forward between two or more things is you are thinking with your brain, which one will get me the outcome that I want? Which one is going to make things best for me? Which one is going to give me this and give me that and take me there? And essentially you have really no control over that. Best thing to do to meet reality where it is to bring your energy from this external world back towards yourself and say, don't matter about the outcome, like forget about what's going to happen out here. Which path is more in line with my values and who I want to be? You know, that for me is the quickest way to get over indecision. And what's interesting is checking in with your values is not done with the mind. You can feel your values with your body. You feel you're in alignment with your body. There's been a lot of research done about decision making over the past 30 years. And in the past 5 years, a lot of it has been somatically based. So it went from like, how do people make rational decisions, to like Daniel Kahneman writing Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, and discovering this whole new system of thought that happens primarily in the body. And when we're checking in with our values, we can instantly feel, which you just kind of go like, yeah, how was I agonizing over this decision when it's so clear? Like the decision almost disappears when you check in with your values because it becomes just obvious immediately. The decision then makes itself. And sometimes you do have to wait for that to happen. You have to go through this constant exhaustion of running backward and forward before your mind gets tired enough to be like, fuck it, I don't want to do this anymore. And then it's like, but I kind of feel, So I would say that indecision is caused by a need to control your reality for some reason.
I love what you said about the deciding factor actually being a somatic experience, and because the body is so much more subtle than the ever-present mind, it's difficult to be able to really read it sometimes.
Sure, and sometimes it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
That's what the body is much faster than the mind. And I had a conversation recently with a close friend of mine that was talking about struggling with boundaries. And so not even knowing where her boundaries were until they had kind of been crossed, and then it was too late. And then being angry and upset with herself for that. It's not the other person's fault, but it's almost like I had an uncomfortable feeling that didn't quite make sense to me. So my mind rationalized why, no, it's fine, and you push it away because it doesn't make sense to you. And you've crossed your boundary. You've crossed the comfort level of your body's intelligence. And no matter how difficult it is, at that point where you feel discomfort, I think you kind of have to go with that and say, hey, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm going to take a step back for a minute. The mind will catch up with you. It could be 10 minutes later, it could be 10 seconds later, it could be 10 years later, and you think, God, I'm so glad I didn't do that. Right? It's almost like your body knows where you are before your mind does. Sometimes we have a tendency to override our body signals because things don't make sense. We're like, no, I like this person, this is fine, this is but it's not. So yeah, absolutely, it's a somatic experience of it.
And it seems like the body is a type of antenna to consciousness or just the environment overall. And because in our whole primal instinct is actually this animal-like nature of sensing the environment, and because most of what's happening is on a subconscious level, so there's no way that we can make it fully conscious. But there's like a depository of really well-honed information inside of us, but we don't know how to make sense of it. And so the fact of feeling, one of my favorite teachers always says, like, intuition first and the intellect follows. And a way, it's very similar, like the body first and the mind will follow. It's exactly what you said, but to allow that spaciousness for so many people is so difficult.
You have to give up some control, or your mind has to give up some control, which is terrifying. But a great book on this topic, which is super accessible, like it's a really enjoyable read, is, I think it's called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah.
About these kind of like split-second knowings of intuition, where you're taking in, your body is taking in this vast amount of input that you couldn't possibly process that fast with your mind, but it's taking it in. And so sometimes you get this feeling of knowing that is not coming from the mind, and you've taken in so much information that you have to listen to that, because it is more knowledgeable than your mind is. So yeah, intuition first and intellect follows, definitely.
And then I guess another larger question is like what we are following in life. And you talked a lot about our value system. Do you feel like fate exists in your own journey? Do you feel like fate exists and the decisions you make are actually, so we'll get away from it. There's free will. There's free will. And
I love that.
There's
Wait,
free
hang
will.
on. Is there free will or is there free will?
Exactly. So if we're saying that life isn't predetermined, but there is some kind of fate, but you're maybe making the decisions to get to that fate, how would you say your value systems play into fate? And would you say fate is what you said of this person that you feel you become? And how do we do ourselves justice? And Nietzsche talks about this, like, to love your fate, to see the way life is guiding you, but also this will we have inside of us for what we know we're able to accomplish, and feeling like we're going towards our fate.
When we talk about free will, the kind of underlying assumption or underlying difference we're having here is, do we see ourselves as an individual, as a separate thing from the rest of existence and the rest of our environment? If we do, then yes, we have a strong free will, we are driving and we are making choices and we are separate and not part of a dynamic interplay. So we are like a car on the road that's just driving and just making all these decisions. That's free will. But for me, I don't really think there's any evidence in reality of that. I just don't see any evidence in nature or physics or anything we've discovered so far that the individual is a separate entity from everything else that's going on around it. It's not the case in particle physics at the smallest level, and it doesn't seem to be the case in huge universal processes. Like, we haven't seen it. So in that case, it does kind of skew this idea of free will a little bit, because we are all part of this dancing interplay of something that is happening. And how can you carve your own path in that? You can't really. You're like a river going through rock. You have to go where there's space, and it has to give where it gives. You can't be any different than that. Does that take away our agency? No, I don't think so. Because you can choose to go against the current or go with it, and it's gonna really vastly differ your experience of life. You know, you can feel when you're fighting and there's a lot of resistance, and then you can feel when you're aligned. I do think that two things can be true at once, or in a way, there's a contradiction between fate and free will, but I see them both as valid within a framework where we are just a tiny part of a greater process. And not to get too like out there, I mean, what are we saying about time then?
Time is relative.
Right, and that's the big discovery of the last 100 years in science, is everything is relative. That's what general relativity means. And for us right now, in our three-dimensional universe, we have to experience time as going forward. But it doesn't seem that on a greater level, that is how time is actually working, right? So this cause and effect of like, I do this and then this happens, and then I could end up here or I could end up here. In some sense, it's already happened. I think that's what we call fate, is that kind of knowing of what is about to happen for us on some level is timeless. Does that make sense, or is that just absolute gibberish?
No, it makes so much sense. And then also with time, it feels like which I've felt that there is, through not only like psychedelics but also meditation and just actually being in reality, that there are different dimensions that are interplaying at once.
For sure.
And it feels like in levels of time, like we measure time in a linear way to just measure change, basically.
Right.
Day to night, what we're doing. It's like a way to, we talked about control, a way to keep control, a way to measure. We love measuring things. But there's been so many points in my life where it seems like timelines have intersected. Different planes of reality have met each other. And even the concept of deja vu. It's like
just about to say it. I was gonna say, I think that's what deja vu is.
Yeah, it's like you are meeting yourself, and in a way, there's always this feeling comes to me so often, like we've done this all before. Yeah, and you can call it past life stuff or you meeting you on a different reality, but there is a feeling of gnosis, of knowing something that's beyond just the experience.
Absolutely. I think, like there's 3 dimensions to our reality now, and the 4th dimension is space-time, as they call it, which is just the measurement of change through space. Like it takes time to go from one point in space to another, so that's basically the 4th dimension of movement. But if you imagine, it's very difficult to imagine, but in order to kind of understand in 4 dimensions, it's easier to look down 1 dimension, because we can do that, right? So if we look at like a 2-dimensional plane, it's got a height of 0 because it only extends in 2 directions. So how many 2-dimensional planes could you fit in a 3-dimensional space with a height of 0? Infinite, because it's literally 0, like it's 0. It's like saying how many zeros can you stack on top of each other before you get to the end. There's an infinite amount of 2-dimensional planes in three dimensions. And so if we take that upper dimension to 4 dimensions, how many 3-dimensional planes can you fit in 4 dimensions? Infinite, because there's one measurement in 3 dimensions that is 0. So people talk about this like multiverse theory, there's infinite worlds, and maybe we cross timelines and things like that. And I definitely do believe in that, especially with the experience of like deja vu. Every choice that you make is taking you through these infinite amount of paths that you could have taken through the 3-dimensional world. You're traveling through time, but you're only able to travel through one time. But there are infinite other times that you could be traveling through. And so if we want to be in alignment with where we want to be, I know that's also a construct of the mind, but even if we're feeling it, we kind of have to align ourselves to walk that path that would be our fate, right? All these kind of concepts coming into one. But that is the power of choice, is almost through our choices, we are choosing the 3-dimensional world that we are walking through. And the version of ourselves that is walking through it is one that we have created with every backlog of choice that we've made. Which is why I think it's the most important thing you can do to choose.
So you feel that there's always choices in life?
Always.
Always.
Yeah, always. Do you? I'm so happy for you to disagree with me. It would actually be my joy to be disagreed with by someone as intelligent as you. Like, please put me under some pressure. Do you believe that there's always choice?
No.
Okay.
When I'm looking at my own personal history, there feels like certain things that have happened that there was no way that it could not have happened.
Oh, for sure.
That it needed to
For
happen.
sure.
And in the moment, it looks like there was a choice.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a choice. So it looks like the world,
Yeah.
it looks like the world is presenting you with something.
Right.
But it's not. Like, there's no real choice. There's like only a certain path. When I would have existential crises when I was young. When I was
When you
young.
were young. 2 weeks ago, Roxy. I know.
I'm talking like, I'm not even old enough to have a midlife crisis. I'm talking about my quarter life crisis, my
Right.
adolescence. This feeling of like Rage Against the Machine age, like this era of being young, and you feel simultaneously invincible. And at the same time, like, everything is shit. Like,
You're so fragile,
like,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
you're so fragile. Like, maybe age 14, 15. And I remember having this feeling so deeply, like, towards my parents. Like, I didn't fucking ask to be born.
Wow.
This feeling like I didn't ask to be born. And afterwards, having the feeling like, no, I chose.
Yeah. Oh, shit, I did. Well, I love that. 14, 15, I didn't ask to be born. 21, you do acid for the first time. And you're like, I did ask to be born. Thank you.
And all the things that conspired for it to happen. The myriad of choices that were maybe not choices, but really actually supposed to happen.
Yes.
For you, me, for whatever to bloom and to take place.
Right.
And so that's what I mean. Like there feels like, and I don't know if it's determinism, like, oh, this is like the way life goes and everything's predetermined, or it's like the way that life is so like perfectly orchestrated.
Right.
Like, and you brought up physics or nature and the way everything has some kind of symmetry. Like everything in itself makes sense. Like even the chaos is organized chaos.
Right.
Yeah, and to me that is like the holiness of life. And what you said about fate and free will, the fact of all the paradox and everything being simultaneously true, and holding both contrasts, so many different worlds in one place, that is the human experience. And yeah, it's so beautiful because all these questions are so perplexing.
Right.
Because I don't know. Yeah.
Then, I mean, in that case, I do agree with you that there's no choice. Right. But it comes back to this idea of polar opposites where there is a middle way. And I think on one side we have the kind of fate people, and to the extreme of that is like God's plan people, I call them, where every single thing that happens, they're like, it's God's plan. It's God's plan. It's like this hardcore determinism, which to its unhealthy extreme can result in a lack of accountability, because you say, well, it's God's plan, that's the way I am, I'm not making that choice, it's who I am. And I'm like, yeah, but be better in who you are. Like, you could choose that. And then on the other extreme is like this kind of everything is randomized chaos, nothing means anything. And on its unhealthy extreme, it goes into nihilism. Nothing matters, there is no plan, there is nothing. It's just, we make these choices and they don't matter and we could choose anything. That also can result in some really nasty choices because there is no morality or meaning under that framework. And I couldn't say for sure whether one of them is more true than the other, but neither of them is a world that I would want to live in personally. And my life has become about like straddling this impossible, like such a tiny point that it doesn't exist, right in the middle of them. And I just kind of still swaying from one side to the other as I try to find that balance, because on one hand, I do believe in the idea that I'm being pulled towards my destiny. And on some level, I feel that. I can feel it in my body sometimes. Like you said, things couldn't have happened differently. It's perfect in its execution without your choice. Then on the other hand, I am taking responsibility for the things I do have choice over and trying to choose them, right? Both of those are true in a way for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also something that came up for me while you were speaking is, you said God's plan, which is quite different from this, but there feels like watching certain people feeling like they have like a direct communication with their soul.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain people I watch in life that I'm not super into sports, but watching certain people play sports, and Michael Jordan, you watch and you're like, this is actually what you came here to do.
Yeah.
Like you came
Right.
here to play basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And this difference between this like God's plan I can't change, but at the same time really watching the interior of like, what do I love that nobody can take away from me?
Mm-hmm.
That even if I make no money, even if I get no recognition, and that's the beauty of turning away from the external world sometimes, is like, it's not even a I want, it's like I am.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is what I am.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just watched the grace of some people just following it no matter what. And sometimes even being wrecked by it because the culture isn't ready for it. They're ostracized for it. So many of the great thinkers of so many eras just like vanished because they just followed, and it was way too ahead of the time, ahead of the culture. And there does feel like something with soul's plan.
For sure, right?
Yeah.
But do you think anybody ever doesn't fulfill their soul plan? Or do you think them not fulfilling their soul plan is part of their soul plan?
Yeah, I also have this, these are all theories, but it also feels like there's the opposite. So there's people who come in as like very young souls. Like they're the ones who come into life, they're like, oh, I'll have this addiction and this one, and maybe I'll date this fucked up guy, and and there's this unknowing, there's still this tasting of life without the wisdom. And then there's people who come and they're like, I'm just a monk and I'm reaching enlightenment because I've done this 5,000 times.
Right.
And so there feels like maybe there's younger souls who just came to this planet, and older who are just like, I've done this so many times before that just like, I'm ready. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I've flirted with the idea before, but I'm just not sure. There have been times in my life though that I've been certain that I've been here before. I'm like, I've seen this shit a million fucking times, right? And then there are other times in my life where I'm like, I must be a young soul because I am fucking it all up. Like, why am I making these poor decisions? Like, I don't know any better, right?
Yeah.
There are aspects of that. And I don't know, when I think like this, it makes me wonder what it's all for. Like, then what, if there are young souls and old souls that are trying to fulfill their purpose, what is that purpose for then? You know, it raises so many questions.
I think the biggest wound, and you also touched upon this, I think the biggest wound that we have as a society is the wound of separation. And the fact that we came from the womb, we came from oneness, and then we entered the world as separate.
Right.
And then the fact that we learned more and more how we were separate by gender, skin color, whatever it is, like learning more and more separation, more national ideologies, whatever, like constructs of mind. And the purpose is to return back to the feeling of what you said before, of wholeness. And what that means. There's this, and that's again a paradox, that there's this interconnectivity for sure. And as you said, like, oh, it's only me driving the car on the highway. I don't think that exists either. There's an interconnectivity, but at the same time, there is something that is so uniquely individual. And I think that individuality of, soul's quest or whatever you want to call it needs to be honored. And that's my issue with a lot of culture and society, is making it look linear and making it look like there's only certain models for it that are valued. And this is why the person who is meant to be a dancer is a doctor, and the doctor is a dancer, and whatever else. And everything's kind of jumbled up because of the way we think life is supposed to be, rather than the way in which like what we want actually manifests in reality.
And I do think that, I mean, could you hypothetically imagine a different culture than the one we're in which the point of the culture is to foster this sense of going towards your own purpose? I don't know if that's even possible. Like, is that even a culture that could work? I think we're so indoctrinated. I'm from the West, you're also from the West. We're so indoctrinated in individualistic consumer capitalism that it's hard to even conceive of a culture different to that one, where even your labor is separate from you. Like, the things you do with your own body is something you can sell. Even that is an alienation of your body's production value from your own self. So if our labor is even something that is completely separated from us, I mean, what is sacred there? There's and these are the cultures that we were born into before we even knew what culture was, what self was, and it's really hard to think outside of those constraints. I'm not sure how to even conceptualize a culture or a society in which there was an emphasis put on wholeness. What would that look like?
Well, because my parents are Indian, and I'm Parsi, which is like a Indian Persian, and it was always interesting, like going back to India as a child when I was younger, and watching really clearly the beingness of life versus the doingness of life. And I think it actually goes into the way we think about, once again, the way we think about time. If you're a Westerner and you believe this is one life, this is one life you have to live, you are fucking doing it up. You are doing everything. You are consuming everything you're wanting, you're seeking, you're taking it all in because it's one life. And time is finite. If you're Indian and there's so many other lives, and there's a chance your next life will be much better than this life you're in now. The way you interact with your surroundings is so vastly different. And so I did have this feeling of straddling both worlds. So in India, especially in cities, it's so unpleasurable. It's so unpleasurable to be in that it kind of makes sense to me why people just left and sadhus just go into the mountains or do a pilgrimage. And the necessity of turning the external environment off and going inside to feel the solace, to feel the freedom, and that is beyond the culture. And so getting to the places within ourselves that is beyond identity and beyond what we were handed. And you look at, India, it's about turning the mind off, you're meditating. But then you go to South America, it's about nature, it's about the plants. It's a completely different way of interacting with life.
But it's like same but different.
Same but different, like different methods that will bring you to the same place of what it means to be, like beyond culture, beyond. I love in life the transpersonal. And actually the personal journey then bringing us into the transpersonal, because we need to go through it first. We need to be somebody first before we can let go of somebodyness.
I read something super interesting recently where they had done a study, and this was in the United States, about children that lived in an environment that was more natural. And they measured nature here by, how many plants were in the house, or was the view over a garden, Were you playing in a large outdoor area with the trees? All of these kind of things. And the children with the highest natural environment, they had better concentration, better self-esteem, they did better at school, they got along better with their peers. And the most interesting thing about the study is that children with a high natural environment, if they experienced bullying at school, it had no effect on their self-esteem. That's so interesting, no? You think if a child gets ostracized by their peers or bullied, that it would impact their self-image. But if they spent a lot of time looking at a tree, it didn't. How can that be? Like, that's completely insane, right? In a similar study, it was also like patients that could see out of their hospital window some trees and patients that couldn't. These guys went home faster and had less infections and complications than the other group. So this just goes back to this idea that us and the world is not a separate thing. It is a dynamic interplay, it is an exchange of energy, that's what's going on. And if you cut people off from that, there is some consequence to it. And the same with the cities and not connecting with your internal self. You're almost going against the natural order of the way the energy moves. So yeah, super interesting. Yeah.
Oh, well, I feel really happy with our conversation. And I would just I have one more question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, everything you were saying about decision making is, and it's almost actually the same way I think about love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, love and decision making, which seem kind of different, but to me it's like what I value the most about love is the person I become when I'm loving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of what you said about decision making. What I love about when I choose, when I'm consciously choosing, is the person that I know I can become.
Mm-hmm.
And so, do you have any advice on what it actually means to be the person that you feel, and we talked about soul, that you feel your soul came out to be?
Mm-hmm. Wow. You save that question in your back pocket and then you just smack me across the face with it.
I planned nothing, this is spontaneous.
Wow, that's a huge question.
Or
And
what has helped you the most?
It almost feels too huge for me to I just want to clarify a disclaimer before I answer it, that I have no spiritual authority to answer this question. I can only answer from my own perspective. It's not like I'm some sort of expert on following the internal nature of your soul. Yeah. You touched on this before when you said there are a lot of parts inside of a person, usually, right? You can often feel some sort of conflict between the different parts of yourself when you're choosing things. And a great example of this is like when you really love someone, like you really love them, you want the best for them. And part of wanting the best for them is wanting them to have the best experiences for their full enjoyment of life and their full freedom and expansion. And you want that, right? When you love someone, that's what you just, a part of you just thinks yes. But if that then includes that they will fall in love with someone else, and that's part of the expansion, another part of you, a different part of you that is afraid to lose the person you love the most, very natural, goes, I don't want that. I have to make that stop. I have to put limits and rules and impose and no. So one part of you is like, yes, expand, I love you, be free. The other part is like, I can't cope with this, I'm going to die, right? That's the most extreme form where we can see like this pull. And I believe that part of meditation and these present moment practices is to give ourselves a small gap between what happens inside of us and then how we interact with the world in our external behavior. If you can cultivate this gap, in that gap is the space to choose. That's essentially what it is. When you have very little gap, people that have a very, 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 very tiny gap, we say that they lack emotional control. They feel anger and they throw a glass. There's almost no, it's so impulsive. There's no like, maybe this is not the best, right? But if you have that kind of something you cultivate through training of meditation of like, oh, this is happening inside of me, but hang on. That gap there is the power to choose. And that's where you get to decide which part of yourself do you align with. Because you get a choice. And there is no right choice. It's absolutely fine if, and many people do, align with the very human, animalistic part of themselves that says, we are a tribe, don't go outside this tribe, don't meet other people, and if I'm angry, I'm gonna smash something, and if I'm hungry, I'm gonna eat chocolate. There's nothing wrong with this. You're well within your rights to choose that. That is just as much a part of you as this free, heart-centered spiritual part. I don't want to create this dichotomy where we have like the higher self and the lower self. I don't like that. I think all it creates is a judgment where you look down on a part of yourself and exile it, and it makes it stronger when you refuse to accept it, right? It comes back with the strong, like, I'm going to eat all the chocolate. So, to distill it into one sound bite, for your marketing purposes.
Yes, I'm so great at marketing.
Yeah. If you create a small space in yourself where you are able to meet your reality as it is, you will find in that meeting of the present moment that you do have a choice. A small one, just a nudge this way or that, and that is enough. When you come into that moment with an open heart, you don't even have to make a decision. All of this hour and a half to say that decision making is nothing at all if you're doing it right. Because if you're doing it right, you're not making a decision. You're meeting your path where it is, and the decision is making you. The choice is choosing you. That's what it really boils down to. Like, you have to have that space. If you're choosing well, you're not choosing. That's the paradox. And I think that's where your perspective really comes in nicely, in that we're not really choosing.
Because life is working its way through us.
100%.
And I think that's actually
100%.
what we want. And even with all this, the constraints and the controls and all these things, I think on the highest level, we don't want to be in control. We want to be in the state where everything is happening through us instead of to us.
100%. Yeah. You are then a direct part of life instead of something that's in it, fighting for things to happen. Yeah, I think, again, a part of us desperately wants that. Another part of us wants to remain in control. So which one do you want to align yourself with? And that's kind of the only decision you really need to decide. Like, which part of myself do I want to go with in this moment, and to go with it. Wow. I could carry this on forever. Like, I don't have a life. I don't have a life. But yeah, this is fascinating stuff with you.
Aww. Yeah, I'm so glad we had this conversation.
Yeah.
And because I love that this is our first real conversation together.
Yeah, we decided to mic it up. It was so risky. Hey, what do you think about decisions? Yeah, I make a lot of great ones. Oh, yeah, could have gone so badly.
I think it went well.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Roxy, for having me.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right.